So I'm gonna double back here to you mentioned the liver.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, all these pharmaceuticals, they work by means of overriding the liver's ability to digest, so they go through the blood-brain barrier, and
Yeah.
so yeah, they're giving you a good punch in the liver when you. Anyway, it's interesting too. Chinese medicine has a really unique take on the liver's function systematically. You're
Mhm.
talking about essentially we're talking about masking things with a symptomatic approach, which is sometimes very necessary, um, but perhaps a lot of times not. And some people might not like me for that, but whatever. And then taking a more systematic approach. In Chinese medicine, we have the branch and the root. If somebody comes in and they're experiencing pain, you treat the branch, you help the pain go away. But then what caused the pain? Was it a traumatic injury? Did they dislocate a shoulder? Or is it something, is it like a nutrient deficiency?
Mhm.
Or is there something underlying, like structurally, right? So you can help the pain go away, you treat it, acupuncture, whatever, but then we have other protocols to go deeper and say, let's prevent that from coming back.
Yes,
Instead
exactly.
of just come in, 3 times a week for the next 10 years to treat this, right?
Right.
Instead of putting you on meds for the rest of your life,
Right.
great if that's going to get you in here or get to a place where we can actually find a solution to the root
Mhm.
systematically.
Right.
What happens in the brain is going to affect the entire body, right? So a lot of the work that I've done through different qigong and the herbals and medicine is looking at chronic inflammation and dysbiosis.
Oh,
There's a
absolutely.
lot in focal. I mean, we're looking at basically 21st century what causes every brain problem,
Right.
right? So, and to me, the way I'm looking at EMDR is you're kind of going a brain to body approach,
Right.
which is a lot of what I do is going body to brain.
Mhm. Yes and no. And so when we go back into the going back to the chemical part of the brain and what you're talking about in with herbs and with inflammation there, absolutely, and that can have a huge impact. As you saw, that was really effective for you. And
Yeah.
what you're doing is those cortisol when with EMDR, what you're doing is those cortisol dumps, those cortisol levels that get elevated because of stress, because of trauma, because of reactions to trauma. That's that chemical imbalance in the brain. You just have too much cortisol running around. And so let's keep the cortisol where it needs to be, where you access it during fight, flight, freeze, and not otherwise, not all the time. Then it can have that impact. And so, but that idea of the brain to the body, yes and no. EMDR is a very, very somatic based therapy
Good.
because we store trauma in the body. Now, the access point for activating it, talking about it, really working with it seems to be in the brain because that's how we as humans function
Right.
through language and thought and memory. But it's the memories in the body. The access point to the where it is in the body is in the brain, but the trauma is in the body. Bessel van der Kolk, The Body Keeps the Score, he goes into that in quite detail. And there's lots of stuff out there these days about that. And that's a piece that outside of Western cultures, they've known for a very, very long time. In the Western world, we're kind of late to the game of like, oh, the trauma's in the body. And the rest of the world is like, yeah, you think?
Right.
And so, in that idea of, but with EMDR, it's a whole body approach. It's not necessarily brain or body because we're using the access points in the brain and rewiring those memories. But a lot of the work that we do, as you experienced, is how many times did I ask you, and where do you feel that in your body? And where's that in the body, and making sure the body is clear, because the body is actually, as you know, so much more intuitive than the brain. And our bodies often know so much faster than our brains do what's going on, and our bodies don't lie to us the way our brains do. And so accessing things through the body, sometimes there's a lot of body work that goes into EMDR, and asking where is it in the body, where's your body storing that, what does that feel like, and desensitizing that. Part of it is we want to desensitize the thoughts and the feelings and the negative beliefs about self, all that heady stuff. Yes, because that impacts how we feel in our body. But we also want to clear the body sensations and not just emotions. We work with both of those because it's all part of that memory network. All of it's there wired in together. And so that body piece. But going back to what you said about the root and the branch, and I love that because that's absolutely, when the branch is broken, yes, you heal the pain, you fix the branch.
Right.
And if that's all that's really going on, something came up and hit the branch and it broke, yes, heal the pain, heal the branch. But if that branch broke because of a mineral deficiency and it was weak and it just broke when it shouldn't have, that's when you're looking at the whole root system. And so, I mean, I'm not going to speak for Chinese medicine because I am not qualified on any level. but um, but when it comes to EMDR therapy, it's very much let's treat the roots. A lot of talk therapy can treat the branches and kind of put band-aids on the branches. Pharmaceuticals are the same way. Pharmaceuticals very much are, and that's what you were talking about, healing the branch. Again, in the moment, that can be helpful. That's not always just something to avoid.
Right.
But healing the root causes and the root issues, that's really where the long-term healing is. And what I tell so many of my clients, let's rewire your brain so then you don't have to cope with what you don't feel, and then you can just go live life. You don't have to see me for weeks and weeks and weeks, months and months, years and years on end. No. Nobody wants that. I don't want that. You don't want that.
Absolutely. I noticed after day 2,
Mhm.
I was approached by something that otherwise was incredibly triggering, and I was like, I'm not responding to this. What the heck's going on? This is
Yeah.
amazing. It's absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
Life changing, truly life changing.
Yeah, because you don't have those triggers. And like I talk to a lot of my clients, and I probably talk to you about this, you get to live life from that place of choice
Hmm.
rather than that place of reaction. Because if I'm not reacting to those triggers, to those old yesterdays, I'm only dealing with what's right in front of me, then I might have an emotional, I might feel some stuff. I might get upset about something. It's not like you're going to stop feeling, but you're having an emotion that's or a reaction that's manageable and it's appropriate to what's in front of you.
Yeah.
But then you can deal with that. You can react from a place of choice rather than when I get hijacked by what happened and the last 20 years, then I'm just reacting and there's no choice in that. When the autonomic nervous system takes over, you're done. You're just out of control and you're just hoping you survive.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people with Tourette's and other tic disorders, a lot of times there's a emotional trigger.
Yeah.
Whether it's trauma based or not, there's typically a lot of the times there's for me personally, anytime I was in a higher stress situation, I was taken off the fucking wall. It was wild.
Yep.
um, because there is that emotional shift,
Yeah.
which then is going to essentially hijack your nervous system and play with those inflammatory cascades. And there is that underlying, in a lot of cases, there's an underlying root of something tending towards those that nitric oxide response rising and
Mhm.
these inflammatory cascades. But there's that emotional
Exactly.
aspect to it. So for
Right.
me personally, I recognized um, if I'm not reacting to that, then that's not happening. And so then, tics reduce.
Yeah.
And it's one to one, and it's incredible. I feel like I can go on forever about that, but I pretty redundant.
Well, and what you and I talked about in your situation with that emotional trigger,
Hmm.
when you would feel that, then that's what would set off those cascades, and that's when you would start ticking like crazy. And sometimes Tourette's, and often, and I'm definitely not an expert in Tourette's or tics, but in working with that with people, when there's that emotional reaction, a lot of times the Tourette's or the tic or whatever it is that's developed, that's a direct result of some trauma somewhere.
Hmm.
And again, not being an expert in that, I can't say always,
Sure.
but very often that is the case. And so as you go in, because the system is using the tics, the Tourette's, the whatever's going on, it's as crazy as this sounds, is coping skill. And it's to not feel something else.
Hmm.
And so our systems do that in many, many different ways, whether it's developing an eating disorder or it's an addiction of some kind, or it's something more neurological like Tourette's or a tic. And it feels like, well, I didn't choose that. I'm not trying to not feel something. It feels like it's just something that takes over. But that's exactly what happens is the nervous system just takes over and it's doing something that can look like lots of different things, and Tourette's and tics fall into that, to not feel something else. And that something else, and you and I talked about this, that something else is almost always helplessness. Helplessness is a feeling that we as human beings are not designed to feel or tolerate.
Mhm.
Our systems will do lots of things to get out of feeling helpless. And that happens a lot with kids because so much of their lives are out of their control. You
Mhm.
know, that's just the life of a kid. And so when there's trauma happening and they're helpless to get the adults to do it right, essentially, then that can turn into lots of different things. It doesn't always turn into Tourette's or a tic, but it can. It can turn into that. It can turn into anger. It can turn into an eating disorder. It can turn into self-harming behaviors are the same thing. It's trying to find control over something, and sometimes it's very conscious, like a self-harming behavior, whether it's cutting or burning or some of those things, picking, trichomania, hair pulling. That's trying to find control. I feel so out of control. I need something I can control. And so those will often manifest that way. Now, Tourette's and tics don't fall into that because those feel very out of control. And I'm not like aware of like the need for control. That's more my system goes to that place, and why some brains go to one set of coping skills and other brains go to others. You know, that's a whole nother story for somebody much, much smarter than me. But it's the if you view Tourette's and tics as potentially as coping and coping skills for whatever's going on with that trauma, then as you heal the trauma, that coping skill that you're not choosing, like some coping skills are chosen, like addictions, though we can make a case for how really chosen that is when you're dealing with trauma, or cutting, or some of those conscious behaviors that we choose. Sometimes they're not, that something like a Tourette, a tic, or like Tourette's, those are just happening and you don't feel like you can do anything about it.
Mhm.
Really, the only thing you can do about it is treat the trauma. So then that, whether it's the trauma actually causing the tic or the trauma or some kind of an emotional reaction is exacerbating the Tourette's or the tic, if you treat that trauma and you treat the emotional aspect of it, it's either going to resolve things or it's going to reduce things greatly because you don't have all of that extra cortisol and stress running around. So even if the trauma isn't the actual root of the Tourette's, which it very well may be, but if it's not, healing that trauma, whatever it is always going to be beneficial to what's going on.
Absolutely. I feel like when we talk about roots, you know, everybody, you know, for some people that may be trauma. I think for me personally, there was especially a large aspect of that with me.
Yeah.
Um, you know, I think, yeah, whether you're talking about is, you know, is trauma at the root, or is it more inclined towards a, you know, chronic inflammatory response, or is it more of a dysbiotic situation going on, or what have you, or a combination, which
Combination. I was going to
I
say it's
think for
usually
most people,
that.
we don't operate in absolutes. I think for most people, there's going to be some sort of combination there, or maybe something else I didn't mention.
Right.
And so th- I think also taking this perspective allows space for the idea of there is healing for this.
Right.
Because I think so many of us are told that's genetic. You can't do anything about it. But
Right.
first of all, with your work, and tell me if I'm wrong, you are altering genetic expression.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
The herbs that I'm on, that I take, the vast majority of them will impact genetic expression. The qigong will absolutely impact. We go down to the
Good.
DNA with it. You are impacting genetic expression.
Wow.
So, you know, just tossing it off saying it's genetic, there's nothing you can do about it, I think is very defeating. And it
Mm-hmm.
puts us into this cycle of there's nothing I can do. And I think, again, that goes back to this sense of helplessness,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
which, I mean, I don't want to live that way. Right.
No. Right.
And, you know, I think, but for so long, I was like, you know, because I was on pharmaceuticals for 10 years, and that was the worst time of my life.
Yeah.
Not because of the meds, but because of everything I was going through, and the mindset that this is what I'm stuck with, and
Yeah.
it's going to get worse, it's going to get better. I'm going to have good days, good weeks, bad weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it wasn't until and honestly the work through different practices of mine, it was by accident that it started positively impacting
Right.
my different disorders, whether it was depression, anxiety, OCD, or
Right.
ADHD, or I mean, fucking everything,
Right.
right? But then realizing, oh, hold on, when I do more of this, there's less of that, right?
Right.
Whether
Exactly.
it's my emotional
Mhm.
disorders or tics or whatever. And so
Right.
today, there's not a neurologist in the world that would diagnose me with Tourette's.
Right.
No
Right.
one's going to diagnose me with uh, bipolar or
Right.
depression. No doctor's gonna sit down with me for 2 hours and think, oh yeah, check, check, check. I don't have those symptoms anymore.
Right.
The branches, I mean, I'm not gonna say entirely, but a good 90% or so.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and and personally adopting that mindset of no, 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 I
Right.
can actually do something about this
Mhm.
is enormous. And I think the message that you're giving to people right now is, hey, EMDR over here, like we're going to get to the root of this,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
And really give you the ability and the skill to heal. And it is work, but
Right.
yeah.
Kind of to sum all of that up, but in a more general term, because you said that all beautifully, about not having the symptomology to get diagnosed anymore. And absolutely, I would have a hard time seeing anybody diagnose you with any of those. But if you look at the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical, I don't even say it very well because I hate that book. I can't do that. But that little book that's way too expensive. The book that all therapists and psychologists and psychiatrists use to diagnose people. And I just hate diagnosing people because it's all just untreated trauma. Just, and how the diagnosis piece truly is helpful in the medical field when you're looking at medications and the medical side of things. I understand the time and purpose for diagnosis. In the therapy side, the psychological side, the mental health side of things, people get really, really wrapped up in diagnoses, and it drives me batty. Because how is that, and a lot of it is based in how do we medicate that. But even if it's not people that are prescribing medications, okay, you can call it whatever you want to call it, but in the DSM, in that the manual that we use to diagnose people, those are all symptom clusters. It's not anxiety. Anxiety is the symptom of, and it's almost always untreated trauma. And so if we can just view everything in that book as untreated trauma, and again, for some people it's going to manifest, or the symptom clusters are going to look like what you want to call anxiety. Great, call it whatever you want.
Mhm.
Or it's going to look like depression, or it's going to look like bipolar, or it's going to look like borderline, or it's going to look like schizophrenia. Because for various different reasons, that they all look different. But in the end, it all goes down to that root of whatever trauma is there. And when we talk about trauma, everybody has trauma of some kind. When we start looking, some people have lots and lots of really obvious big traumas. Yes. Some people feel like I don't have any trauma in my life. My childhood was great. There's nothing. But when we start looking at those small things, sometimes again that stick in ways that we don't want them to, then, and somebody might not necessarily be in a therapist's office or having any diagnosis of any kind. But if we go looking, there's some things in their life that probably could get rewired and just make their life a little easier than it is.
Mhm.
Or they're problematic enough that they're coming in to see a professional, whether it's a psychiatrist and they're looking for meds, or it's a psychologist or to get a diagnosis, or it's a therapist. Doesn't matter. It all goes down to trauma. And so if we start looking at those different diagnoses as just symptom clusters of the untreated trauma, so let's diagnose the trauma. If we have to diagnose anything at all, let's just treat the trauma and let people go live their lives like you have done. And sometimes bringing in other things like the qigong and the herbs and a lot of the things that you have done to work with that are incredibly helpful and necessary, and those are great things. But on their own, those things all by themselves and kind of by accident got you to a pretty good place. But there was a level that was missing, and that was when you came to see me, and that was like that last missing piece for you.
Yeah. Last bit of the puzzle there.
Yeah, yeah,
And what an important piece.
yeah. So
Um, okay. So, Sadie, how
yeah.
do people, Sadie, how do people, how do people find you? How do they, find EMDR and perhaps
Right.
work with you?
Yeah, so I specialize in the EMDR intensive, where people will come work all day for several days in a row or 5 days. And so if somebody's interested in doing an intensive like that, or they just want to discuss it or kind of feel that out and see if that's appropriate for them, because it can feel intimidating to a lot of people, I do offer a free 30-minute Zoom sort of intake. So we can meet online and talk about it, talk about your situation, and we can talk a little more specific about whatever's going on for somebody. And so to do that, you can go to my website, which is Akiso Counseling, and that's spelled Akiso is A-K as in kite, E-S-O, Akiso, counseling.com. Or my email address is just akisocounseling@gmail.com. So you can go to my website, that's got my phone number, you can call me, text me, you can email me, or you can message me through the website. And so if somebody's interested in, there's also a lot of good information on the website about EMDR and about EMDR intensives. My website still shows that I do hourly EMDR because I used to. I need to update my website. I'm not doing therapy like that in that format anymore because I'm trying to free up time in my schedule to do this international work. And so I do just, and I find EMDR intensives, people can feel better and have their life back in a matter of, 3, 4, 5 days, rather than months and months of therapy, even if it's good EMDR therapy. And so I don't do hourly or weekly therapy, but if you're interested in that, you can send me an email and I can help you. If I know somebody where you're at, I can make a referral or a recommendation for that. Or you can also go to, excuse me, EMDRIA, which is EMDR International Association. That's kind of the overarching organization for EMDR therapists. And their website is emdria.org. And there's a therapist finder on there. So you can click on that and then you can put in your location, your zip code, and then it will give you the people in your area. Now, if you're looking for an EMDR therapist that you want to go see in person, you can do that by 5-mile radius or 25 or whatever it is. There's a lot of people doing online therapy now, thank you, COVID, and doing EMDR online. EMDR can be done very effectively online. And so there you can find somebody that's a little further away, but you want to make somebody that's in the same state as you. And that has to do with licensing, restrictions and stuff that I won't bore you with all of, but they won't be able to see you if they're not licensed in the state that you're in. So if you're looking for somebody to do online therapy, they don't have to be in your specific town or city, but they do need to be either licensed, they need to be licensed in the state that you're in. With the intensive, I see people from all over the country, but they come to Denver because with the intensive, it's so many hours. Nobody wants to be on Zoom all day for 4 or 5 days. No. And so if somebody wants to come in, I have people that come in to Denver is where I'm at, and they'll do an intensive with me that I do quite a bit of. So you don't have to be in Denver. You don't have to be in Colorado to work with me. You just have to come here. But Denver's great. Denver's a beautiful city. Nick can tell you all about Denver, Boulder, in this area. And so if somebody really wants to work with me, send me a message through my website or send me an email and we can talk about options and what that looks like. If you want to do more hourly EMDR, that can be a really great option for people. You can get a lot of healing. That option works really well. I did that for most of the last 10 years. I've just changed my business model for the things that I'm doing in my life. And so then you can find somebody. And there's a lot of really good hourly EMDR therapists here in Denver and on the Front Range as well. But we've worked really hard to train lots of them all over the world. Now, if you're listening to this and you're not in the US, that doesn't mean that you have to come to the US. As an EMDR trainer, we train people, and I volunteer for an organization called the Humanitarian Assistance Program. And we work to train clinicians here in the US, but also clinicians all over the world. So there's EMDR Europe, EMDR Asia, EMDR Africa. We're working to get EMDR. I think we're not on Antarctica yet, okay. But the penguins, look out, here we're coming. Right. And so if you're interested in finding somebody trained in EMDR to help with any kind of issue you're looking at, there are options. And if those resources I gave you don't take you there, send me a message and I can kind of help connect you to something that can be helpful, hopefully.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you so much, Sadie. Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you.
you're welcome. Thank you for helping me get the word out there. I appreciate
Yeah,
it.
absolutely. You know, it's growing slowly, but it's growing.
Good.
And
Good.
yeah,
I think it's awesome that you're really doing, and it's coming from your personal experience, but really helping people that have dealt with some of the stuff you've dealt with. Really, there is hope. It's not, because I think especially Tourette's and tics, yeah, you're told this is just going to be something you deal with. It's a neurological disorder. This is just how your brain is. The best we can do is give you medication to help manage whatever. And if that were really true, okay, fine. I'm glad we can at least manage it. But when it's not true, it's so frustrating.
yeah,
And so having people like you, I mean, I can talk about healing the trauma and all of that all night and day, but to have somebody who's experienced going through being diagnosed and living with that diagnosis and those medication for years and years, and then coming out of it, that is such a powerful, powerful testimony, but it's just such a powerful thing for people to really get that firsthand experience from you. And then pairing that with some of the stuff that I talk about. Yeah.
yeah.
So
Thank you.
you're doing really good work in the world. Keep doing it.
Thank you. That really means a lot.
Yeah,
Hopefully a lot of people are going to benefit from this long term. So
right. And that's not even talking about the Chinese medicine work, good work you're doing in the world. That's just with this podcast and the Tourette's piece. And then you're doing all that too. So
it all comes together.
it all comes together. Yes. Well, it's just such a pleasure to know you and to work with you. And you're just doing really cool things. I'm so excited for you.
Thank you, Sadie. You too. Absolutely. All right.
Yeah.
I'll let you go. I know you're
Yeah.
hopefully got
Got
something
some.
coming up right away. So
Sounds good.